We started.
Perfect. Now, welcome everyone to our last Women and the Intersection of Gender and Mobility webinar for 2024. It's been my pleasure to be able to host this series so far, and I'm looking forward to potentially keeping it going in the new year. And we'll talk about that at the end. But for today, we are going to look at the intersection of gender and mobility a bit broader than just women in mobility. And that's one of the things we've discussed quite often within the Women Mobilize Women initiative, and those of us that collaborate with the team, is how can we make this space more inclusive to all gender identities and not just specifying on women. So today's episode is really going to explore that in terms of the experience of mobility for those who are two-spirited LGBTQIA+ folks. I'm joined in this webinar by two wonderful guests, Thysz Estrada, who is based in the Philippines, and then Andrea Maria, who is based in Bogota in Colombia, who is able to join us today for questions if you have any at the end. Thysz, unfortunately, is not able to. It's the evening for her right now. So if you have questions, we do discuss ways to reach out to them later. What we'll do from here is that we will play the previously recorded session discussion that I had together with Thysz and Andrea. And then after that, we'll have room for questions if you have any, which you can type in the chat if you'd like, or you can raise your hand and ask it yourself, whatever is most convenient. But with that, I will pass it off to Maggie to get started with the recording, and we'll see you on the other side.
Welcome, everyone. In previous episodes, the intersectionality of gender and mobility has explored how the intersectional approach to gender-responsive mobility can better address the diversity of needs of women depending on factors like age, ability, race, income, and geographic location. But intersectionality also means discussing non-binary experiences of gender and sexual identity. Social safety, access, and cost can be particularly influential on the mobility options that are available to two-spirited LGBTQIA+ folks. So in this episode, I've brought together two representatives, Thysz Estrada and Andrea Navarrete, to join me in discussing what those influences are, how we can collectively plan for and design more gender-responsive transport that truly responds to the needs of all genders and identities. I'm really, really excited to speak with you both. Andrea, we've had an opportunity to meet before. Thysz, this is our first meeting, but I'm really pleased to have you here. So why don't we start with a brief introduction from both of you, and Andrea, I'll start with you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Andrea Maria Navarrete Mogollon, is my full name. I'm working right now at TransMilenio in Bogota, and I'm doing a PhD on engineering and working and focusing on gender and transport. So very glad to be here with you and to join to this conversation.
Thanks, Andrea. And Thysz.
My name is Thysz Estrada. I'm a proud transgender woman from Manila, Philippines. And I am also the chairperson of the Philippine Anti-Discrimination Alliance of Youth Leaders, or PANTAY, which is Filipino for equality. And I've led many efforts to integrate gender and mobility.
Wonderful, thank you. No, like I said, I'm really pleased to have you both here to have this discussion. I think in mobility, what I'm learning through this intersectionality webinar series is there are so many different perspectives that we need to take into account. And one thing that those of us that work on the gender perspective of transport are very aware of is we often look at this from the perspective of women, which can sometimes be binary. And so we need to make sure that we're taking all identities into account. And so that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation. And so to start out with, the first question, and I'll start with you, Thysz, given that often gender and sexual identity can sometimes not be immediately apparent to others in public space, how does this potentially influence the transport choices of people that may not identify in the binary of man, woman?
So thank you so much for a wonderful question. The main impact is really about safety. Because people behave differently when they see somebody who is, they don't have the expectation of matching gender expression with what they see in the person. And unfortunately, intolerant people or those with already discriminatory backgrounds would think of these people as something that's not just out of the ordinary, not just weird, but unfortunately, sometimes they think that these people would deserve violence. So it's not just violence in terms of physical violence, but also violence in terms of access or decision making. Sometimes since they're, for example, if people in transport, somebody is a decision maker, as simple as a person who decides if you can go on board a bus or public transport, but if that person has prejudice against transgender or non-binary people, you cannot get on the bus, or you cannot get access to the train station. You cannot get access to, for example, trans women for female exclusive coaches in trains. So these kinds of hardships are forms of violence, emotional, psychological, and unfortunately, sometimes it does happen that we experience physical violence. So the impact of just being yourself, living your authentic self, uh, it's unfortunate that there will be anxiety and fear uh, once you step out of the comfort of your home. When in fact, public transport is public, it serves everyone, right?
Yeah.
It should be as equitable as any form of public service. So yeah, that's it's a terrible thing, obviously, but that's the experience of gender diverse individuals.
And Andrea, in your experience, how would you build upon what Thysz has shared?
Yeah, I think that the invisibility of gender and sexual identity in public space remarkable influence the daily transportation choices or social of these social sectors, and the lack of immediate recognition of their identity in these spaces can make them feel vulnerable to discrimination and harassment, and leading with the coaches in selecting their transportation options. So many of them tend to avoid certain spaces of transportation modes they perceive as unsafe or where the risk of discrimination is high, as frequently occurs in transportation systems. In Bogota, for example, according to some data showing high incidence of harassment and violence in these environments. And for trans people, the second most common form of violence reported in the system is unwanted sexual propositions. And homosexual are those who most frequently receive offensive comments in the system. And this reality reinforces the need to opt to routes, times, or transportation modes that, while potentially longer, less convenient, or more costly, provide a greater sense of personal security. And in this context of vulnerability and caution, the invisibility of their identities lead us to increase distrust of certain modes of transport and the search for alternatives that allow them to feel less exposed to harassment. And consequently, the transportation choices of these people are deeply influenced by their perception of safety in each space and moment of their journey. And this is why it is essential not only to study gender issues related to transportation, but also to delve deeper through an intersectional approach. And I think intersectionality allows us to examine how multiple aspects of identity, like gender or sexual orientation and race, intersect to shape distinct experience in transportation, public spaces. And when discrimination occurs on the basis of gender, intersectional analysis can provide us a more nuanced understanding of these issues, as it highlights how overlapping identities can intensify vulnerabilities and expose individuals to compound forms of exclusions and violence. And this perspective, I think, is very crucial for developing truly inclusive and effective transportation policies.
Thank you both for sharing. And I think that's an important message that you've both pointed out is the fear and experience of violence has such a big influence on when public transport or other transport modes are used, how frequently, how far people are willing to travel, their routing choices. And that has so many knock-on effects that we've talked about in previous episodes in terms of older adults, in terms of knowing where to sit, for example, just so they can have a moment of rest. We do have an episode on anti-sexual harassment campaigns and talking just from the perspective of women identifying as women, how much influence that plays in terms of where they go, but then also the knock-on of access to education, access to employment, access to healthcare, that has this intersectional connection with the experiences that you've both shared as well. So thank you I think it's important for us to remember to draw all these together, that it's not one experience for all, but there are so many connections that mean that we're all striving towards the same outcomes. So Andrea, you did talk about a few things that are necessary to help move towards better experiences, but can you share a bit more in terms of what is necessary to understand the experience of two-spirited and LGBTQIA plus folks in terms of mobility? Be that through engagement or just, as you had mentioned, also more analysis?
Yeah, that is a difficult word for me, LGBTQIA. To understand the LGBTQIA experience in mobility, I think it is essential to collect disaggregated and specific data on travel patterns, safety perceptions, and incidents of discrimination or violence that this group faces in transportation and public spaces. This detailed information allows us to identify their unique challenges and make their experiences visible, what is crucial for developing inclusive policies and transportation designs that address their needs. For example, in Bogotá, according to the last mobility survey, 96% of public transportation users identify as heterosexual, while those who identify with a diverse sexual orientation and have the highest use of public transport are homosexual individuals. And of the total trips made up public transportation, the 37 are made by women using the public transportation system. So the same for transgender and non-binary individuals. This mode has the highest participation rates. Also, the number of daily trips made by people identifying as homosexual and bisexual is less than 1% of daily trips. So the data for certain groups are sometimes so minimal that they are underrepresented in surveys. And however, this doesn't diminish their importance. Even with a smaller sample size, these insights are crucial for understanding the unique mobility patterns and needs of all community members, including those who might otherwise be overlooked in broader analysis. Also, I think it's necessary to include LGBTQIA perspectives in transportation planning and policy design, integrating intersectional approaches that consider how factors like gender or sexual orientation and other identity dimensions intersect. And creating an inclusive environment requires structural transformation of disciplinary practices and making the specific challenges of this community visible and ensuring their voices are actively involved in policy development.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, and sorry, I recognize I live in a country where English is not the first language also, and when I say LGBTQIA+, I throw a few people off, so I understand every culture is a different culmination of letters, so we all have patience in how we describe these things. So no worries, and you're doing great. And Thysz, in terms of your experience as an advocate, what do you strive to help people understand in terms of the experience of LGBTQIA+ folks?
Yes, so fantastic point from Andrea about data and how it helps form understanding of patterns. And through data, we understand what needs are supposed to be given and what kinds of support and representation needs to be still done in the mobility field. But the work here in the Philippines is more geared towards a more cultural change, a change in understanding and deep respect towards people of diverse genders and sexual orientations. That change is the one that we push because we need people to understand that there's literally no binary that should exist, right? Because it's a way that we should be able to accept the diversity of a gender and the diversity of gender and sexual orientation in the country. Our country is a very deeply conservative Catholic country. To be honest, it's one of the only two 90% Christian countries in Asia. And imagine the pervasiveness of that kind of conservative thinking. Our culture will need to change and shift so that all these policies could have a cultural core. Not just it's not just something that we would implement. We're not going to ask people, oh, it's in some law, you have to follow it. Deeply in their hearts, they should know that this is the right thing to do. So a lot of that is done in behavioral change discussions. We try to, as much as we can, employ behavioral change workshops, look at people's understanding, meet them where they are in terms of values, and start from their own understanding or maybe even ignorance of LGBTQIA plus experiences, and then bring them to the light. Take them from just tolerance to full acceptance. So that's the challenge, but also that's the efforts that we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Is you need, on one hand, you need for policymakers sort of that data oriented or more organizational or software related content, but then you also need the behavior change along with it, and understanding cultural norms, for lack of a better word, that might be impacting this ability to move forward. And I think every country has their own cultural baggage that they're trying to unpack to make sure that individuals who, as you said so eloquently, Thysz, there is no binary, but people that feel that they might fall out of what is perceived as the binary are included. And unfortunately, we find ourselves at a time where at a lot of places that's being challenged, but I think the more we have conversations like this and talk about it in the different aspects of the experience of people, I think is so important. So then sort of building on, you mentioned some workshops and conversations that you're having, Thysz. How are designers, planners, and policymakers therefore responsible for improving the perceptions and experience of security and mobility?
Huge responsibility because what we're trying to ask them to do is to not think of integrating gender responsive policies after the fact that they've done, for example, buses, terminals, train stations, spaces where mobility happens. We want them to integrate this at the design level. So we want gender responsive design to happen even before some construction is being done. That's why it's important for us, workers in the advocacy field, to have that intervention with these designers, decision makers, engineers, to intervene in terms of that kind of behavior change. Before you even design the space for mobility, have yourself educated what kinds of needs other people of diverse gender might have, and inform your design so that it won't be an afterthought, right? Because it's so hard to retrofit everything. You've already done the terminals, you've already done the bus stations, the train stations, and then you realize, oh, we want to be more responsive to our users who are LGBTQIA+, we need to add this and that and that. We want this to happen at the level of design. And the intervention has to happen with the people who make the decisions, design these things, to consider the experience of LGBTQIA+ individuals and other gender diverse peoples. So the effort is there to connect with this. As Andrea said, this is all intersectional. We're all working because if we try to do this for the least represented of our society, the impact, the benefit actually goes up to the most represented. So if you think and design for the minority, it impacts the majority. Because true enough, we're all temporarily abled. We're all temporarily, um, uh, in a way, um, privileged. We will eventually find ourselves underprivileged, disabled, and part of um, a part of society that can experience being a minority. So why do we have to think always for those who are, are already enjoying these kinds of facilities without a second thought if they're going to be
Hello, Anna.
assaulted or experience
Hello?
violence, right?
Mhm.
Hello,
We have to
hello,
design
Anna.
this for the most vulnerable,
Hello.
and it will have the same or even bigger impact to those who can enjoy these things
4:30?
without thinking of what could happen to them.
2:30.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's another theme that comes up repeatedly is, if we're talking about intersectionality, we are talking
No,
about an
it's
underserved
it's
group,
just
but
before
we
2:30.
all, at some point in our lives, find ourselves in that group. And, how do we make sure that we're not designing ourselves out of the system, essentially? And Andrea,
Yeah.
you work with TransMilenio in sort of development of policy and planning. So how does it look from your side of the table, so to speak?
Okay, I'm agree with Thysz. There is a huge responsibility. Designers, planners, and policymakers have the responsibility to improve the perception and experience of safety in mobility, especially for LGBTQIA plus people and other vulnerable groups and diverse groups. This requires an approach that integrates equity and inclusion into all aspects of transportation design and planning, and recognizing that transportation safety experiences differ from the LGBTQIA social groups. And it's essential to challenge cis heteronormative norms and adopt design approaches that reduce risks and promote inclusion, creating transportation environments that support diversity. And so data reveals that incidents of violence and harassment are common in specific spaces like stations and buses, and highlighting the urgency of creating conditions that minimize the risk of harassment and violence. And this can be achieved through more inclusive and proactive designs and policies, including the implementation of safer spaces within transit areas, strengthening motoring systems. We do that in Transmilenio, for example, and making anti-harassment policies visible. By integrating these considerations into planning and policies, stakeholders can create a transportation environment that acknowledge the specific vulnerabilities of LGBTQIA individuals and actively works to minimize the risks. And creating safe and respectful transportation spaces is essential to ensure that all users, regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation, can travel with confidence and without fear of discrimination or violence. For example, in Bogotá is a city with comprehensive mobility data, including valuable insights related to mobility of care. However, it is essential to expand these quantitative data sets with qualitative data sets, allowing us to gain a deeper understanding of travel experiences through methodologies like cartographies, affective mapping, or corporeal mapping. These qualitative techniques can capture these invisible realities of user journeys, enriching the quantitative analysis derived from the studies and the mobility survey. And integrating both types of data will provide a more holistic view of mobility that addresses the diverse needs and experience with the community.
Yeah, no, that's an important point, is that mix of the qualitative with the quantitative. And, you discussed at the beginning, we need disaggregated data, but it is so important to understand the actual experience in relation to that data as well. So, yeah, so I guess I have one more question for you both. And Andrea, I'll start with you.
Okay.
In terms of what core message would you like to communicate to improving access and security and mobility for two-spirited LGBTQIA plus folks?
Okay, the core message for improving access and security in mobility for the LGBTQIA community is that public transportation must be an inclusive, safe, and accessible space for everyone. Transportation systems should be designed and operate with consideration for the diversity of users and workers and their specific needs for safety and respect, fostering an environment where everyone can travel without fear of the discrimination or any kind of violence. It is crucial to implement policies that address the safety needs of the LGBTQIA people, protecting them from discrimination and acts of violence that negatively impact their mobility experience. These policies should respect and value individual difference, allowing all users to feel safe and free to enjoy in public spaces and also transportation, of course. Committing to safeguarding diversity and creating a transportation environment that doesn't tolerate harassment and violence is essential to ensuring an equitable and positive mobility experience for all. Ensuring that public transport is a space where everyone can travel with confidence and dignity should be the goal of any inclusive and respectful mobility system.
And Thysz, your message.
Amazing. I couldn't help but clap. Andrea said, it's very inspiring. Us in Manila look up to Bogota a lot for your efforts in transportation. But my core message really is that the promise of public transportation and urban mobility is that it's the great equalizer. It's a famous quote from, I think, the mayor of Bogota that said that the richest. It's not the goal for public transportation for the poor to just use, but the richest to use it, right? And that's the goal. Make it as equitable as it can be, not just in terms of economic reasons, but also for everyone, because everyone feels safe in public transportation, as safe as they feel in their four-wheel vehicles, private vehicles. And, we can only achieve that if we integrate that equality, that the lens of equality in all aspects of our lives, resisting discrimination at every point. And then it hopefully trickles down to public services. I always say this in my classes in gender identity and sexual orientation, that the reason why we're trying to learn and eventually respect the diversity of gender and sexuality as humans is because we know how painful it is to be excluded, and how painful it is and to live in a world that actively excludes somebody. And this is the root of all discrimination. I wish for a world that this is the last generation, my generation is the last generation that remembers discrimination. And that's the goal, should be, for everyone who feels like it should be every person's right to enjoy a full life without fear and, with full human rights. So that's my message.
Thank you. And I think those are both two beautiful messages, and something that we should all take to heart more often. And not just the people that live and breathe this dialogue, but the more people that maybe it's not part of their everyday, but can share the value of making sure that everyone enjoys the same dignity of safety, of access to public space, of being able to move around in the way that they want is so important. And I think this conversation could go on more and more and more. And I actually hate to cut it short. I'm not cut it short, but just stop it here. But I think what I hope is this sparks new conversations, that we can discuss this more often. Like I said, with all of these webinars, my eyes are open to a different experience that isn't my own. And I think there's so much value in that for me, but for everyone that participates, in understanding that, you know, for Women Mobilize Women, of course, it has women in the title, but it's not just about mobilizing women, it's about mobilizing everyone. And I really appreciate both of you coming in and sharing your experiences and knowledge. So thank you for that. Before we sign off and move to questions, I wanted to ask if anyone has questions for you that they aren't able to ask, or they're watching this at a later date, how can they find you to reach out and maybe pose new questions? And Thysz, I'll start with you.
Yes, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I am quite sure I'm the only Thysz with this spelling on my name. So just please look for THYSZ, that's Thysz Estrada on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm active there. But yeah, my email is also thysestrada@gmail.com. So shoot me a message anytime if you're interested with transgender experiences in Philippines and Southeast Asia.
Thank you. And Andrea?
The same. I'm in LinkedIn, and I have a Twitter account, X account. And I have an Instagram account, and I also have a blog, a personal blog, where I'm just posting some reviews or some work of my PhD. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. Equitable Mobility plus blogspot.com. Yeah, and point, not pluses, point blogspot.com. And you can find me there. I put there the email, Andrea Maria Navarrete @gmail.com in Spanish, so you can find me in any social media.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the work that you're doing as well. And I hope that we stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to start out just by apologizing. There's a little bit of work happening in my house, so I might mute myself if it gets a bit too loud, but I think we're okay for right now. I just want to say once again, thank you to our guests that joined us. It was such a good conversation, and I'm really grateful to be able to have been able to host it. We do have Andrea with us. If anyone has any questions you'd like to ask yourself. What I'm going to start with, maybe Andrea, because you mentioned you worked for TransMilenio in Bogota. Can you maybe talk about the protocol that you kind of touched on a little bit, but maybe expand on it a little bit, and then we'll go to questions?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Sorry about my voice. In Bogota, we have a gender action plan, and this plan has have 3 key lines of action. The first line focus on addressing gender-based violence. The second is about deepening or understanding the travel experiences through qualitative research. And the third is to dedicate some kind of strategies to increase the participation of women in the transportation sector. And as part of the first line of action, we have developed a comprehensive protocol to address gender-based violence against women, children, members of the LGBTQIA social sectors, and even men who may sometimes experience this kind of violence. And TransMilenio plays a crucial role in this framework as a first responder, ensuring that incidents are properly addressed and activating the necessary support channels or some special care for the possible victims. And this effort is further supported by a dedicated team working directly on the field in each station, engaging with users in stations and the buses, and to provide assistance and the response. And additionally, I want to emphasize that the essential role of other entities in ensuring effective care and support, because without this collaboration and coordination among Bogota institutions, it will be impossible to guarantee the assistance to those who has some kind of gender-based violence. And this integrating approach highlights our collective commitment to creating a safer and more inclusive public transportation system for everyone, advancing in the gender equality and the safety across the city.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think that's the point you made there of, it's important that it's not just one organization, but multilateral or multiple organizations working together, that we can have a very positive outcome, not just in terms of local action or organizational action, but broader action across the board for transport. I'm not seeing any questions, but there was, I did want to share, Crystal Stefania has shared the Together We Go Further campaign from Eurostar as a good example of, as you say yourself, Crystal, the first time you felt yourself being seen as a queer woman in this kind of public transport campaigning. So thank you for sharing that. Are there any last questions before we go off and enjoy, hopefully for all of us, a nice, calm and restful holiday period? If you do have one, raise your hand or type it in the chat. I'm not seeing anything. So then I guess with that, I want to close off by once again thanking Andrea for coming today to answer questions that may have come up, and again participating, and to Thysz, where she is enjoying an evening in Manila. Thank you again. As a wrap up, as I said, this is our last webinar of the Women Mobilize Women Intersectionality webinar series. We have done in total 8 webinars this year, focusing on topics such as race, socioeconomic impact, ability, age, as we had done a few weeks ago, anti-sexual harassment campaigns, pregnancy, and then the episode today on the LGBTQIA plus experience. We are open always to new topics. We are surprised by sometimes what comes through, and pregnancy, for example, was one that was suggested where we were a little uncertain what that would look like, and it actually resonated quite significantly with our guests, but also with those who participated. So what I would like to suggest is, if you have an idea for a topic that maybe can be covered by Women Mobilize Women in a webinar in 2025, to please let us know in the chat when this is shared on YouTube or via LinkedIn. I'm seeing Monica typing something, so I'll see what she says here. Or feel free to contact me as well. I'm also on LinkedIn, Melissa Bruntlett, and we'd be happy to explore that. I think these conversations, as I said in the recording, have been super valuable in terms of learning about experiences that are not my own, or not the same experiences as those who have joined us. And they are, in a lot of ways, a conversation starter. But this shouldn't be the end of the conversation. And so if there's even a topic that we've talked about already that you think can be expanded upon, then by all means, yes, please do share that. Monica says mobility of kids in different ages. We did cover the youth experience, but I do believe that there's multiple experiences within that. So thank you, Monica, for sharing, from young children all the way to teens. I do believe that we tend to overlook teens when we're talking about mobility in public space, and perhaps we can engage with some teenagers themselves to come talk to us about their experiences. But with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you to those who have followed us along throughout the year. Thank you to Women Mobilize Women for asking me to host these sessions. It's been my absolute privilege as a Women Mobilize Women ambassador. And I do look forward to sharing future messages and thought-provoking content with you in the future. So with that, thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Melissa.
Bye.